I love that so much.
Joining us on the screen now is my brother from another mother, Professor Jared Ball, Professor of Communication Studies at Morgan State University, author of the recent book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. Brother, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
And it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And a shout out very quickly to my African and African American Diaspora Studies 100 class, all of whom should be tuned in. And we'll find out about that shortly after. But anyway,
y'all better. Matter of fact, go and subscribe to our channels. That's how we're gonna know that y'all are actually out there doing this.
Each and every one of you guys from the class, subscribe right now.
Click like, do all of that.
all that. Listen, Professor, I'm gonna be. I mean, you know this, and I'm just gonna keep it 100 with the audience. Like, I literally did not have a list of things that I wanted to talk to you about because I know as soon as I bring you on, it's going to be nothing but pure brilliance. But we can start with your book. We've talked about it on the show before, and I think it's still a critical kind of thesis that you're trying to make sure everyone can understand about the myth of Black buying power. Just kind of give us a quick synopsis of that.
Well, the short of it is that the claim that we hear all the time, and we just heard it repeated more recently over this month of Black History Month, and it's been even more recently reported in association with Latin America, that we have this 1.4 or $5 trillion in buying power, and that if we were more, quote unquote, financially responsible or financially literate, rather, and more responsible and more mature with our spending and our consumption, that we could somehow close these persistent income and wealth gaps. And what I've just tried to show in the book is that this myth has a specific origin targeted specifically at Black America to encourage us away from the only power that I would argue we have, and that I think those in power know we have, which is social movement, political organization, and collective power in a non-economic sense that try to move us away from that and push us towards Black capitalism and entrepreneurialism as a tactic of limiting our power. So through this, I just try to show how this myth is promoted and regurgitated and unfortunately supported by both Black and white commercial presses in its promotion, because ultimately what it's there to do is to steer ad revenue to Black and white corporate or commercial presses. With more than about $500 billion in ad revenue being spent every year, obviously commercial presses want to capture that, and to attract that revenue, they want to be able to say that their audiences, and in this case, Black audiences, have this kind of power, quote unquote, to spend on the products being advertised. The problem is that gets turned into, quote unquote, economic analysis and misrepresented as a financial strength that does not exist.
I love it.
Yeah, I love every bit of it, and let's work our way backwards right through that, right? So because of the incentives of that $500 million, or did you say $500 million or
half a trillion? It's about $500 billion every year.
$500 billion on advertising. So there's this concerted effort to create a narrative that will push those dollars into corporate media. And the thing that stood out the most about what you said is that our true power, that narrative particularly eats away at our true power of organizing and social movements. Let's dig in there, right? Expound on that. How do we then leverage our true power in light of a massive propaganda campaign that seeks to almost neutralize our true power? Because those two things are kind of at odds with each other, right? The organizing power of the Black community and the greed that is at the core of everything that's on the other side of the aisle. How do we come to terms with that?
Well, honestly, I mean, I hate my answer. It's insufficient and vague, but the reality is we can only do this through political organization. Everybody has to join organizations. I'm very much with Kwame Ture on this. Everybody should be a member of an organization. It doesn't matter which one it is. If it claims to be trying to help Black people improve themselves, you should be a member of it. And then from that point, politically educate, organize, and try to push those organizations more to the left. And then we can have disagreements and debates about what we do in those organizations and in those spaces. And most of that, has to happen offline and off the record. But that's the only way. That's the only way it can go. But when we are constantly barraged with messaging that says you can do this by setting up a business or saving your money. While there may be benefits to that on some level, these are not solutions. Wealth is not created through small business development and circulating the dollar, as is often said in our communities mythologically as well. Wealth is created, and something I don't talk about in the book, honestly, but wealth is first and foremost created through military conquest, genocide, enslavement. White wealth wasn't created through starting small businesses and circulating their dollars. It started through conquest and free labor. So when they turn around and tell us, well, you should just start a business and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and to my, the young brother Devin Springer, who I got to credit him with this, who said the metaphor doesn't even work. You literally cannot pull yourself up by bootstraps. So the idea that this could be turned into economic and political terminology is equally fanciful. So this is anyway. So this is we have to again just build organizations, join those, and try to push them to the left, and ultimately assume political power and develop public policy to redistribute the wealth that we all participate in creating. And that's why those who have wealth understand that, and they've captured the public policy apparatus. And I know you and I don't fully agree on this, but that's a lot of where your show is focused and your work is focused on trying to capture that political power and using that for the good of your community. Again, you and I may have disagreements on the path as it relates to that. But that's the kind of disagreement and discussion that we're supposed to be having. Once we get past the idea that the starting of a small business will do it. And very quickly, I've been a part of a paper, and hopefully, I'll share it with you when it comes out later in about a week, hopefully. And maybe I can come back, or one of our, my colleagues can come back and talk about it, because it's an assessment on the condition of Black business pre and post COVID. And one of the stats that I've just keep highlighting in the run up to this paper coming out is that from 1992 to 2012, Black people created over 2 million businesses, and yet only captured the increase of the captured increase of the national revenue only went from 1 to 1.3%. So this is not an issue of Black people not knowing how to start businesses or being entrepreneurial in spirit. It's about being locked out of the apparatuses that actually produce wealth. And that's what my book is in some small way trying to address, mythologically in terms of the mythology.
I like the way you slid that critique of me in there, really, really nicely nestled in between some amazing things.
No, it's just to be honest. But that's the point. Like we're not on the same page with that, and but my point
it's
is
love, and
it is, and that's how it's supposed to be. And my point is, but once we agree that is the discussion, the pathway to assuming political power, and we're not arguing over, well, why haven't you started your own business, or why haven't you invested better, or why are you shopping poorly? We learned all last year and are still learning that it is, the economy in this country is at least 70 or 67% consumption based. When you don't consume, when people don't consume, the economy collapses. So instead of telling poor people to stop spending frivolously on hair or too much on coffee or rims, we should be saying thank you for that consumption and rewarding that consumption with a greater degree of the wealth that creates going back to the people through whatever variety of mechanisms you want to come up with. Because when you don't buy that $8 latte, the people who work at that coffee place lose their jobs. So a conservative. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you're speaking. It's like school is in session. I feel like I'm back at Florida A&M in the classroom.
No, because that's what I was. But Rebecca, hang on, because I was going to say because I love we actually agree on probably 99% of these things. The only thing I don't agree with is the fact that he's at Morgan State. It's and the fact that Bethune-Cookman.
It's all right. But
every time we ever ran into them.
We'll take this education. For now, we'll take
classes in session.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that you make those points, because a lot of people who are on these social media platforms are in the apps like Clubhouse, and they're saying exactly what you're saying, and they're saying things like, you shouldn't be spending your money on the cars or the hair, like you said, and they don't understand that it's so much more to that. There's a process like you just laid out, and if this conversation or the book, whoever's watching should definitely get it before you make your Clubhouse appearances and start judging or pressuring Black folks to use their last dollar to do whatever.
To use a stimulus check. Start a business with your stimulus check.
To start a business or start judging them because they didn't use their stimulus check to start a business, or, you know, you're judging them for that. But, you know, get this man's book, because this is definitely key things that we should all understand and know, because it's backed up by stats and everything. So thank you so much for that. I honestly feel like I am in class right now.
Yeah. No. Right. Well, yeah, go ahead, Doctor.
No, I was just going to say, I appreciate that. And folks, I'll happily let them know that because people rose up in the streets last summer, the publisher rewarded that, as is the case, I think, as an example of how to assume power. People rose up. And you know, it just needs to be organized and taken the next steps. But because people rose up, the publisher has rewarded that by offering the book in its digital form for free. So you can just go to my website, imixwhatilike.org, and click that top right, you know, and get that free. And you know, so there's really no reason not to get it. It's a relatively short read. It does have stats and information and leads you to many other sources to follow up, but it should, you know, but it's easily digestible. And I hope makes or is going to make or continues to make an important intervention, because the propaganda keeps coming. And lastly, I just want to say very quickly, because again, with the Black History Month push that this myth got, very prominent people in very prominent spaces, for instance, have been misrepresenting a lot of the history, particularly as it relates to Dr. King, and his radicalism is often diminished. But there have been a lot of misrepresentations of him, particularly in terms of economic strength, and even arguing, as was the case not too long ago down there in Atlanta, that he was actually never had to use the phrase buy Black because Black businesses were already always there supporting him. But if you actually go and read his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And I believe it's on page 51, at least in the Kindle version, he says specifically that, quote, buy Black, end quote, cannot work because it is insufficient, because Black people don't have any money. And because ultimately, as I'm saying in a less, eloquent way than he did, it is the state's involvement in redistribution and policy that determines wealth. And that's where we need to be addressing ourselves too. So he has literally said buying Black won't work as a campaign, and is used to this day, even this month, this year, as a proponent of the mythology. So that's one of the reasons why it's so complicated and difficult to assess. But once you just really look at it, it is really made plain very easily.
Doc, you first and foremost, I always love having you on because I really enjoy sitting in the presence of Black brilliance. And I've read the book, and thank you for getting it to me. And I read it, and I want to just say that not only is it an accessible read, it does connect some synapses, right? It does if you really read what Dr. Ball is saying in this, it really does clarify and give you insight into a whole lot of things. And so I definitely recommend it. I want to double back on something that you said that is so critical. The real source of wealth is not pulling yourself up by bootstraps. It's not starting a business. The real source of wealth on the face of this planet is in conquest. And we have been living in that conquest, and we have recipients, the people who are on the receiving end of that conquest in the global South. They experience that conquest on a daily basis through the military industrial complex. We agree so much on so many things. I'm actually really curious as to where we might even disagree, because the pathway forward to conquering these problems is a mixed. Tell me, let's talk about that. Like, where is the pathway forward for not only Black people, but marginalized people across the globe, particularly in the global South? We just spoke with Congressman Ro Khanna about what's going on in Yemen. That is a direct extension of that conquest that you're speaking of.
Yeah, and unfortunately, though, and this is the only part where one of the parts, at least, where we would, I think, disagree is that the Democratic Party has also played a role in supporting and extending that warfare, and I don't think this next administration is going to make enough of an adjustment on that. So that's the only thing honestly, the only area I'm clear, or I think I'm clear that we disagree, is that I think we need to be left of the Democratic Party, and I think we need to be organizing separately. Blocks and campaigns and movements. That's basically it. So that's really all I mean by that. And that's where I think all the answers lie. or lay.
Absolutely.
I can't honestly remember which one that is. But when but when people organize outside of nonprofit influences and dominant political party influences, I think that's where all the answers will evolve. And that's the kind of, what I meant a few minutes ago when I was referencing the uprising last summer. All it really requires, easier said than done, obviously, is some enhanced organization and preparation, given that, as Kwame Ture, as I mentioned earlier, also always warned us, police violence is not only the font of almost every Black uprising, if not all of them in this country's history. Police or slave catchers, same process.
Right.
Yeah. And that we know it's going to happen again. So if we organize in preparation for that, rather than a response that is impactful and meaningful, albeit disorganized, we would have something that would lead to something else. I don't know exactly or how to get there. I would just like to see, as I, when you had me on before the election, and I talked about, I'm a Malcolm X voter, in that I'm saying that we should organize electorally the way Malcolm said, which is that that is just one element of the struggle, electoral politics, and then we should be organizing as independent blocks with independent campaigns and platforms that we can. Maybe make, that with candidates and policies and platforms that are beholden actually to the community, as opposed to funders and military industrial complex influences, et cetera, which is, again, why I think the Democratic Party hasn't done enough in ending these permanent wars.
Oh, man, listen, I absolutely love your work, man, because bro, we on the same page. We on the same page. Okay. I was just in the election. I'm just choosing which enemy I wanted to fight against. Did I want to fight against neoliberals who enhance and sustain this military industrial complex, or do I want to fight against a fascist who enhances and maintains this military industrial complex? So that was my choice during the election. But here, as we stand right now, word for word for word, I'm on. The only thing I'm not on the same page with you on is Morgan State. But shout out to everyone from Morgan State who's watching
Florida
right
A&M
now. We love you
University
guys.
is the best university in the nation. However, we will give credit to all the professors doing the work, just as Professor Jared Ball is doing. But we know we're not going to do that on today's show. We're not going to do that.
It's love. It's HBCU
It is love.
It is so
and
much
we send love over to Morgan State.
Right. Because we got HBCU all on the screen, right? So shout out to FAMU.
Let me just.
Bethune-Cookman in the top left, and then the bottom right. Wildcats, James, and Morgan State. Shout out to all them.
The Rattlers. And that's all right, because it's HBCU love right up in here, getting HBCU knowledge. I do feel like I'm in the classroom. Yes. I hope all the students who are watching from Professor Jared Ball's classroom are definitely listening, taking points, subscribing, liking, and sharing. You're about to find out.
We're gonna find out. There's a pop quiz. There's a pop quiz coming. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make sure I got in here that I congratulated the revamp of the morning show.
Thanks, man.
I appreciate your work, and I appreciate people producing media that allows us to go from the a little farther from the matrix, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's a good
again, we wherever we agree or disagree, I just appreciate that it exists and that you're doing what you're doing and that we have.
Man, nobody disagree with you, brother.
I'm just saying.
But it's good to disagree, though. No, it's really good to disagree in these environments, because I need people to understand, we're not monolithic. We do disagree in places, but we're fighting the same fight. We're going the end goal is for all of us to be free, and we ain't trying to sit here and be stuck
Rebecca.
on a point of being disagreeing somewhere.
No,
here.
But no. Because here's the thing. Thank you, Rebecca. But
you're welcome.
Here's the thing. You had a great way for us to dovetail the entire conversation, because literally what we're doing here is we're fighting for 5 things on this network: for every person on the face of the planet to have housing, to have food, to have education, to have healthcare, and to have peace, security. Those are the 5 things that we're fighting for. The best way that I know how is through media right now, right? And the best way that I know how, and I'm thinking of specifically the Fred Hampton movie that we've referenced every single day. We're going to keep referencing it. The fear of that movie originally was that it was going to be a whitewash of his legacy. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see the movie, but it was as true as a film could be, based on historical events, to, in my opinion, like I think it really spoke to the revolution. And speaking to that revolutionary spirit that is in the bones and the blood of every single one of us, just to what degree has it been awakened? I feel like that method, I feel like what they did with that movie is a useful strategy in moving the ball forward in the national discourse in terms of the revolution. In other words, the revolution may not be televised, but it will be digitized, it will be streamed, and it will come to a theater near you, because the people who are behind some of these projects, they're not playing around. They're not playing around with America. They're not playing around with the military industrial complex. Some of these people, not all of them, but some of these creatives have a real keen sense of what's going on in the revolution. I don't know if you saw the movie, but what are your thoughts about that?
I did see the movie, and now, so finally we got to a point where we can disagree. So,
okay.
so first of all, shout out to Fred Hampton Jr. and Mama Akua and Jerry. Shout out to Morgan State's Dr. Ray Wimbush and my sister Rosa Clemente, who were associate producers on the film. I have seen the film. I've been in dialogue with Rosa and Fred Jr. on a number of occasions, and more to come. But I don't think, but to your point, I think the movie actually is more of an industry response and attempt to blunt the revolutionary fervor in the community and in the streets. And I say that to say very quickly, if you just look at the way the film is framed, it's told from the perspective of the snitch, from the FBI. We don't see, it's not a biopic about Fred Hampton Jr. Fred Hampton, rather. We don't see Fred Hampton's upbringing. We don't see anything about his parents. We don't see anything about his politicization. We don't see anything about him organizing in the NAACP at age 14 and already showing up in intelligence agency dossiers. We don't see anything. We hear reference to the COINTELPRO or counterintelligence program, but we don't really see all that it was meant to do. And it's almost caricatured and reduced to being the emanations of just one lunatic in J. Edgar Hoover, who, as bad as he was really just in one piece of an entire institutional state apparatus that supported him and still supports that approach to these kinds of politics. So we don't really get to see much about we hear references to it, but we don't really get to understand the politics of the Panthers and socialism and armed struggle and guerrilla warfare. And even just as my critique was of the Nate Parker, Nat Turner film, in a film where we're supposed to be able to see beautiful expressions of revolutionary violence, we are held back. We are teased almost, because all of the violence we see is suffered by black people. And when the one moment where white police officers or anyone else might suffer some violence, the film cuts to black. And I think in many ways that's a metaphor for the film's intent, which is really supposed to, I think, encourage a symbolic reference to revolutionary activity, but again, told through the perspective of the state and told through the perspective of the state's snitch, and really meant to humanize him and make it almost seem as though he is legitimate in his decision making, even if we don't agree with it, and that ultimately all that we get of Fred is some brief moments of romance and love and some statements and even some well acted performance, and then he is just dispatched. Even in one point, and I'll stop here, but one point there's a scene where we see him delivering this brilliant speech, and then the camera pans back to show you what the film is really doing. That is giving you the perspective of the one viewing the speech, which is William O'Neill. And then even that isn't done well, because William O'Neill was not some he had a lot more agency, pun intended, in his life and in his relationship with the FBI than is shown in the film. And the film doesn't, and by the way, and there were many more, to the film's credit, they mentioned this, there are many more agents like him that aren't really discussed or laid out in their full damage and impact. Anyway, but so anyway.
No,
That's interesting.
It's a good disagreement here. Let's go. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I could see it to your point, but for people like me who, just heard about Fred Hampton on the sidelines and never really were introduced to that when it comes to Black history or his story. What's interesting about that, when I watched it, I saw Fred Hampton being humanized for us. We looked at the snitch like, in anger and upset, like, how can this have happened? We were introduced to, a lot of people were not introduced to COINTELPRO. A lot of people didn't know what that was. Now, after watching the movie, sometimes we're so invested into the characters. We want to know what's real. Because even though they showed us those parts, I did get that feeling of, there is fluff here. There's some parts that are missing. But we wanted to, a lot of people went out and did the same thing that I did. When you watch, when we go to the movie theaters, we are so invested in that 2 hours, but we want to know the truth. So we get to Google, we get to researching. And in my research, because of this film, I was able to go out and actually research and get the truth and start understanding more about Fred and just seeing just how young he was. And like you said, how he was on the dossier of the feds since he was about 14 years old. So they always been on him. And it was more than just a love story, but it was good to see him humanized as well. A lot of times before that, when I heard of Fred, from other people, it was like he was so radical. But just to see that he was a person was good too, right? But it did force me to go out there and do the research and look at it for what it was, and just look at the snitch as this. There was so many other people in the game or in these organizations just like him, and I can't humanize this man because he was wrong. Just in his he was like the villain in the movie, just in his smile about all the things that he was doing. Psychopath. That's what I got. But it's good to hear it from a different point of view as well.
You raise a lot of good points. I'm sorry, my bad. Go ahead.
Oh, don't appreciate it. I think that's one of the reasons I haven't watched it yet, in fear of that it may be whitewashed, and I have my apprehensions. That's why I haven't watched it. I said tonight I'm going to definitely watch it so I can know what's going on. But that's that's why it's taking me so long to watch it. Just the storytelling and from the perspective of who it's coming from. Don't retell our history to benefit everybody else. Tell it like it really is. That's my whole thing. So I will watch it tonight so I can make sure I know what it is. But like I said, I put it off for the past week and a half almost, just because, like I said, I'm sick of seeing whitewashed Black movies. Honestly.
Well, so in general, very quickly, in tribute to an old friend of mine and co-worker, Brother Vernon, I've developed a version, what I call the Vernon philosophy of Black media avoidance. And it's really just a somewhat comedic way of looking at, of summarizing a lot of radical media and Africana theory and practice, which is just to say that we should be really critical, given the context we're in and the role media are meant to play in terms of propaganda, psychological warfare, and managing public opinion, and the specific role that movies are meant to play. There's a really particular history that film is meant to play in performing functions of the state that is a history many of us are insufficient, myself included, in understanding. But the point I'm getting at is that we shouldn't look for ourselves. No oppressed group should look for themselves in commercial, state, national product as much as we want to, as much as we're encouraged to. We should always, especially when we like it, be more critical of it. That said, I want to be proven wrong here. So, I'm basing this on a number of different things and histories. But one example is, for instance, we were often told when Spike Lee's Malcolm X came out back in the day that this was going to lead to some revolutionary return to Malcolm and his politics, which is unfortunately not what happened. We get the same thing. I had years ago, I had a beautiful but brilliant, a brief exchange with the incredible MC Rhapsody and Ninth Wonder on Twitter, where I was slightly critical of a track that she did where she was claiming it was an ode to Betty Shabazz. But I said, but there's no reference to Betty or Malcolm or her politics in the song. So it's maybe, a great track, a dope thing, but to say it's an ode or a tribute to Betty is a little bit strong. So and Ninth Wonder's response was, but if you remember, back in the day when Tribe put out the song with Steve Biko, we all went and learned about who Steve Biko was and became something else. And I said at the time then, and I still disagree with that I think that that's not what happened. So I don't think that that's necessarily the case. So in other words, I'm saying that, Rebecca, I hope you are representative of a movement today that will prove me incorrect, and that more people will join Fred Hampton Jr. Okay, good.
Because here's why.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Finish that thought. Though. I don't mean to cut you off. Finish that thought.
No, I just want to say that I want people to support the film and support Fred Hampton Jr. and the Hampton House. Yeah. And I want people to support and study Fred Hampton's politics. And I want them to organize and build around the way that Fred Hampton would have been organizing. Look, even I've heard from, and we'll be doing interviews with soon enough with Mark Clark's family. And they're disappointed in the way that this history and story is told, because Mark Clark was killed that night too. And his story is often misrepresented as well. So my point is, I hope people will engage deeply with what is not in the film, so that it will have an impact that I have not seen historically, and I will be happy to be wrong in this one.
Yes, and I think in this case you may be proven wrong, Professor Ball, because even Mark Clark, that was mentioned, but anybody who watched this movie had to be compelled to go find out who he was, because even if it was just mentioned verbally or just in passing, or just in description, I had to be I was looking at it and my mind mentally stored it. When I went to go research, because I needed to know. We know when we're watching these films, there are going to be parts that, of course, it's the mainstream film industry. They're going to please them in some way by fluffing things, leaving out some stuff, and that's just what they do. And when we watch these movies, the older I've gotten, I've understood. And as a millennial, a true millennial, I know that when we watch these things, it's our duty to go out and research and make sure that we're getting the information correctly, or if it wasn't presented correctly, we're researching and having the conversations in spaces like Twitter and on Instagram, and trying to make sure that we control the narrative. And that's why we have these shows like It or Not, because we can have the conversation right here and start correcting and clearing up those things. But you're totally right. He wasn't presented in the movie, but if you did watch it, it was my duty to go out and research and make sure, okay, where was he? What was his part in history? What was his part in the movement and things of that sort? Even in the other organizations that were mentioned, because they almost try to make it seem, and I will say in the movie, when he went out to speak to the white terrorist group, KKKs or whatever, the white nationalist group, they, even when he went out, they tried to me at that particular point, I was like, are they trying to humanize these folks here? Or, because the feds to me, or the feds, the police officers and them are just the same, but I did, it's our duty after watching those films to, change the narrative or correct it, or come out and say, yeah, great product, but here's where you guys went wrong, those kind of things, and to educate ourselves. We can't just go off of, especially not in 2021. We should not ever be just going off of what mainstream film industries and things like that, who are known to whitewash or who are known to leave out. We can't just be going off of that. So
let me jump in there real quick, because I know you have classes and we don't have you for the whole episode, but I was 12 years old when Malcolm X came out. Now, everything prior to that point, everybody got to remember, the 90s and the 80s, they were not particularly good for mass movements. They were always organizers. Shout out to everybody who participated in organizing and being revolutionaries or radical during that period. But for the mainstream, it just wasn't there. My experience with revolutionary movements came through, some boycotts that were organized by Black pastors in the cities that I grew up in, and we participated. But when I was 12, I saw Malcolm X, right? And everything about that movie ignited the revolutionary in me. Then 1995, I was 15. The Panther, not Black Panther, not the Marvel Panther, but Panther that was directed by Mario Van Peebles came out. And I know that movie line by line. That animates me to this day. Not caping on behalf of Hollywood, and actually just pivoting completely from that. I want to ask you, people who are seated in the middle of empire, who have been the victims of empire, every time one of our revolutionaries jump up, brother, they kill us. And as a black man who's got that fire, it just is, I mean, anybody who wants to take it to this government, I will gladly say on every episode, this government does not have the right to remain because it has abdicated its responsibility to us. If for no other reason, COVID-19 should be a death sentence for the ruling elite in this country as a cabal. They should have no authority over us. But brother, they kill us when we get out there with that revolutionary spirit. And I look at it as not a problem, because if you have the spirit of a revolutionary, you know you're dead already. But perhaps people who are seated in the middle of empire and who have been the recipients of white supremacy and capitalism in the way that we black people have, perhaps some people are just trying to do it a little differently and taking an approach saying that while we may not want to receive, it is warfare, it is class warfare, and they got nuclear weapons. So perhaps we're looking at it in a way of how we want to approach it differently versus taking the standard route that is in all of our blood to do. Because you and I agree on this much. This government has abdicated its responsibility and has no right to lead us, even though they're still in power.
First, I want to double back because what you just said reminded me of what I saw you earlier say in your commentary on Rush Limbaugh, and I want to second that. And because I'm also reminded from the other day in the conversation I had that one of his ideological ancestors or older brothers, Ronald Reagan, died during my wedding, and we raised a glass. So and anybody that has an issue with that just needs to go back, as you had done with Rush Limbaugh, and look at the history of Ronald Reagan, which could arguably be said to be far longer and worse and damaging and specific to black people in its damage. So anyway, I just wanted to echo that. I forgot to do that earlier. The other point that I would say is that this is sort of, again, my point about how I think we have to understand the role and function of media, that the reason that I think that films like the ones you've mentioned have come out, and this one, which is a far more, I think, greater challenge, because unlike the Van Peebles film, this film is, I think, much more well acted, well told, well shot, well performed. So as someone who is critical of its politics, it's much more difficult to do, because I watched it and was moved. I mean, I get it. And I also get some of the efforts being made around the film from people like Fred Jr. and the Black Panther Cubs, and so on. So I want to support that, even as I have issues with what I think are the politics of the film. But my point is that the politics of the film are meant to limit the revolutionary fervor and limit, and in many ways, walk us away from Fred Hampton's actual politics, even as we're being given something that is meant to seemingly support them. So the other point that I would also say, to your point about, they don't just kill the revolutionaries, they also exile and imprison them for life, which is why, again, if people are going to be moved by this film, then they have to go and watch COINTELPRO 101, the documentary now freely available from the Freedom Archives. They have to go and sign up with the National Jericho movement and get involved with the political prisoner movement and start communicating with, we can't just wear Assata Taught Me shirts and not be communicating with Sundiata Acoli, who's locked up right up the road from me. We can't be talking about Fred Hampton and being excited about this movie and not talking about the fact that Pompeo and them just lifted the assault, reassigned the assault on Cuba and Assata Shakur. And Mutulu Shakur is still locked up, and Leonard Peltier is still locked up, and David Gilbert, for those who want white allies, he's still locked up. And even the progressive white left don't talk about that. So I mean, so they don't just kill us. They put us in prison and exile us, and then represent the stories of these folks absent their politics. And that's the part that frustrates me and concerns me. So yes, I'm very appreciative that we can have this conversation, because again, it is essential. We don't all have to agree, but we have to be able to have these conversations. And I do want to encourage people to even in disagreeing with me, think more critically about their own relationship to these products and films, and then maybe do what you all have said and encouraged, and follow up and study, and then more importantly, organize around those ideas.
I got it. I got it. Here's how we got to do this, because you're absolutely right. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you, only to the extent of how media has changed and radicalized me. Hell, my own podcast radicalized me. I was about to get in some trouble this past summer messing around with this government, right? So media has a power to do the radicalization, but if it's insufficient, we got to send them to class. We got to send them to listen to people like you who fill in the gaps, who let us see the shortcomings of even like my show, right? Like, or the movies or whatever we do in media, it cannot stop there. It has to be. And maybe you'll get a better experience if you go to Bethune-Cookman University and get that kind of education as opposed to Morgan State or as opposed to FAMU.
They just became a university, but okay.
But yes, we did. But
Okay.
but I think we can agree there that it cannot be the sum total of your education. You got to sit and listen to folks like Professor
Shout out
Jared
to
Ball.
Morgan State.
Shout out to Professor. Thank you so much, man. I am always honored to have you on, always honored for you to push me and to challenge us, and I'm always pushed back. But I love your work, and everybody, absolutely, you got to start by reading his book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, because it absolutely contributed to my way of thinking. So thank you, Professor.
Thank you very
you.
much for having me. I really appreciate it. And shout out to you and your whole crew and your audience. And again, even the book, by the way, starts off with a reference to Fred Hampton and Jay-Z.
Yeah.
So
I definitely got to check that out.
Go download it.
Thanks,
I mix what
everybody.
I like.
And I mix what I like.org. And as I've been signing off in my own broadcast for almost 20 years now, as Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. And thank you very much again for having me this morning.